It's turn to talk about invoice statuses. Our first invoice status is unpaid. Unpaid is a status with which usually the invoice is generated in the system, except for special cases. We are going to talk about them a little bit later. Okay, let's see how it looks on our web interface. Okay, we have a test customer here, and this customer has 3 invoices with unpaid status. Here is our period total for each one of these invoices and the outstanding balance. Unpaid means that no payments were received on this invoice and the due date hasn't passed yet, okay? Our next status is paid. This status shows that the invoice has been paid in full and there are no remaining debts on this invoice. On our web interface, the status paid looks nice and green. Okay, the period total for this invoice, as you can see, is $3. The paid amount is also $3. And let's scroll to the right to check the outstanding balance. Okay, it says here paid in full, meaning that the outstanding balance is 0. If the invoice hasn't been paid in full, however, part of the amount was received, and of course, if the due date hasn't passed, the invoice status changes from unpaid to partially paid. Let's see how this looks on our web interface. This test customer has 3 unpaid invoices. We're going to change one of them to partially paid. Our last invoice, to which the payment will be applied first, is for $25. Let's apply a payment of only $20 and see what happens. Okay, let's go to our customer and apply a manual payment. Okay, manual payment of $20 and press finish. Now let's go back to our invoices and refresh the page. Now our last invoice has changed to partially paid because a partial payment, the payment that doesn't total to the outstanding balance, has been applied. Our payment appears here in the paid amount column, and the outstanding balance is $5 because the initial period total was $25, meaning that in order for this invoice to be paid in full, to change the status to paid, the customer has to pay $5 more. Overdue status, that is our next status, means that the invoice hasn't been paid in full before the due date. Okay, let's go to our web interface again and look at the invoices we have here for this customer. We have a number of overdue invoices here. If we look at their issue date, for example, let's look at this last one here that ends in 8/3. Okay, the issue date was April 19th. The due date is April 21st, and today it's April 25th. So this invoice is overdue. Invoices with different statuses, for example, unpaid or partially paid, will become overdue once the due date passes. Overdue status is an instrument of the collection process. The collection process may apply penalties to the customer if overdue invoices exist in the system. If automatic credit card charge upon invoice generation is activated in the PortaBilling system, such invoices will be generated with the do not pay status because their amount due will be 0. For this test customer, we have a couple of invoices with the do not pay status. Let's open one of them. Okay, we see that the invoice total is $3. $3 of payments were received and the amount due is 0. Here's a little note that also says that the invoice has been paid in full. The meaning of no payment required status is that the amount due of the invoice is less than the collection threshold. This collection threshold is set on the customer class. Okay, let's go to our customer class. This is one of the options in the invoicing configuration on customer class that we didn't get a chance to look at in chapter 1. Okay, the collection threshold is set here. Do not try to collect the payment if the amount due is less than and the amount set. I've already saved the threshold of $2, and it means that all invoices with the amount due less than $2 will be generated with the status no payment required. Furthermore, I created a test customer belonging to the customer class 101 test 2, the one with the threshold, and charged the customer 50 cents. Let's have a look at the invoice that was generated for this customer. Okay, the period total is 50 cents and the status is no payment required. We see here that the invoice total and the amount due are equal and they're both equal to 50 cents. It's less than $2, so everything was generated correctly. Why are the no payment required invoice status and the collection threshold set on the customer class useful tools in the PortaBilling system? Because it doesn't really make sense to launch the collection process when the amount due is very small. It may mean that the customer had credits from previous billing periods or used the service for a very small amount. Payment required doesn't launch the collection process like the other statuses like unpaid or partially paid, meaning that no payment required will not become overdue past the due date. Invoice with the status overdue has always the possibility to trigger service suspension, customer termination, and other penalties. We wouldn't want our customer who owes us less than $2 to go through this unpleasant process. Just a quick note here, I've already talked about automatic credit card charges. In case the invoice is only for 50 cents and that is under the collection threshold, the credit card would still be charged for the amount of 50 cents. However, the important point here is that the collection process would not be launched. Previous balance remaining status means that the current invoice total is 0. However, there is previous balance that is greater than 0. The same is true for the amount due. It is also greater than 0. If we go to our web interface, we have already some invoices with this status. Let's open one of them. Okay, so the amount due is $34. However, the invoice total is 0. This amount comes from the previous invoice balance, which is also $34. Okay. Last two statuses can be assigned to an invoice only if a special option to hold for review is activated on the customer class. Let's see how to set it up. Okay, this is our test customer class, and this is one of the options that we haven't looked at before when we had a very close look at the invoicing configuration. Usually for send the invoice via email, we choose the option that says automatically from the drop-down. But if we want to hold the invoice for review, to have the ability to view it, check it, and fix it if needed before sending it to the customer, we need this option. Okay, Once it's activated, all the invoices for this customer will be generated with the under review status. Okay. And also one more thing, we set the number of days we want to hold the invoice for review. This means that we will have 2 days to review the invoice manually. After these 2 days are up, the invoice will be approved and sent to customer automatically. Of course, the hold for review option is only available for regular invoices, those that are generated automatically. You will not see this option for out-of-turn invoices, and it makes total sense. Out-of-turn invoices and those invoices that are generated on demand are reviewed by the administrator on the spot while generating them. When we discussed operations with invoices, we already said that once the invoice is in the accounting system, either of the service provider or the customer, it's very difficult to make changes. So it's always a good idea to make sure the invoice is correct before sending it to the customer. In what cases it will be a really good idea to hold the invoice for review before sending it to the customer? When we have a new type of customer with a new type of service, and we are not sure that the system will calculate the charges correctly. Or if we have a VIP customer who simply wouldn't admit errors, and of course we do not want to lose his trust. So double checking is definitely the way to go in this case. Let's simulate the review process. Here for this test customer, we have already an invoice with the under review status. So let's open it as if we were checking the charges. And since this is a test invoice, we already know that it is correct. Our next step is to go to this action menu on the right and to click approve. Okay, let's do it. We have a little message here that says that the invoice will be approved and sent immediately to the customer. We agree. We click approve again. Okay. And we see that our status has changed to approved. Approved is a short-lived status. It's going to change to the status that corresponds to the payment situation very soon. Let's click refresh. And our status changed to unpaid because our invoice is not overdue yet and no payments have been received. I've just simulated the manual approval process, but there is also automatic approval that is defined by the number of days set here on the customer class. Once 2 days elapse in our case, the invoice will be approved automatically unless it's approved by the administrator before that. Why do we need this automatic approval? Imagine we have a very sizable invoice, for example, for $20,000 for our VIP customer, but our administrator falls ill or takes a vacation without ever approving the invoice. Without the automatic approval, the invoice would get lost. The collection process would not be launched. The customer will also not become aware of the invoice, and the service provider would lose a sizable amount of money.